Hey everybody, real quick, if you need a recap of the Umbrella Academy seasons 1 through 3, I've got you covered. Just hit the tab in the upper right-hand corner. It'll take you right to it. Now, season 4 picks up 5 years after the events of season 3. Everybody has gotten used to this new timeline, and everybody's gotten used to having no powers. They've all kind of gone off and found their way in life. Victor left the family altogether and runs a bar in Nova Scotia. He rarely talks to his brothers or his sister. Luther, he's a stripper, and not a very good one. He's got terrible rhythm and really no moves. I don't know how he's made a living doing it. Ben, meanwhile, has spent his time in prison. He got arrested for a crypto scheme, and when he gets out, Luther is there to pick him up. And Ben's not too thrilled about that, but he needed some place to crash and some place to put down as a home address for his parole officer, so he's forced to bunk up with Luther. Diego and Lila have had a nice life. They have a daughter named Grace. She's turning 6. But Diego's frustrated with his life. He works for a UPS FedEx type company, and he sucks at it. He and Lila fight like crazy. And he's got ambitions of joining the CIA, FBI. He still thinks that he has these skills that he doesn't actually have. Allison has found her way in this new timeline as an actress. Even without her powers, she's been pretty successful, albeit not as successful as she was in her old life. She's kind of a C-list commercial actress. But she lives with Claire and also Klaus, who's been 3 years sober and has become a major panophobic, which is basically the fear of everything. Klaus, however, loves being an uncle to Claire. The two have gotten really close. And then there's number 5, who actually does work for the CIA. And lately, he's been infiltrating a group called the Keepers. The Keepers are a small yet growing community that believe they're in the wrong timeline. They all have memories of things that didn't really exist, and mainly they have memories of the Umbrella Academy in one way or the other. So 5 has a vested interest in this group. It's like a more serious group dedicated to the Mandela effect. But while number 5 believes that this is important, his boss, the CIA, does not. He orders 5 to just push it aside and start focusing on other missions because this one he feels like has no legs. 5, however, has no plans on doing that. They're all, though, going to have a little bit of a family reunion when Diego and Lila have a birthday party for Grace, and everybody's invited. People like Victor and Ben definitely do not want to go. And Allison also doesn't want to go. She feels like her brothers probably hate her for what she did, and she doesn't want to face them. But one way or the other, they all show up. Everybody except Victor. Victor does show up, but before Victor can actually make it into the birthday party, he's stopped by somebody who kidnaps him. For the rest of them, the birthday party is a little bit awkward because a lot of them haven't seen each other in the same setting for years. It gets especially awkward when Lila drags Allison inside. But Luther, recognizing that this is a bit awkward, just proceeds to act like nothing's wrong. The awkwardness finally comes to a very merciful end. And when it's done, Lila has a book club to get to, or at least that's what she tells Diego. In reality, Lila is going to a meeting of the Keepers, that group that number 5 is trying to infiltrate and find out more details on, although number 5 had no idea that Lila was a part of it. When he's brought to a more serious meeting of people in the Keepers, he's very surprised to see Lila, but he doesn't blow her cover. He just quietly walks up to her with his horrible disguise. It's really just number 5 with a fake mustache and a Jeff cap. And he asks her, "Hey, Nancy," because that's the name that she's going with this group. "Hey, Nancy, what are you doing here?" And she explains that the transition from full-time assassin to caregiver for 3 children and an overweight husband has been a little difficult, so she figured that she would do this because it's cheaper than therapy. Their conversation stops when the presentation begins and 2 people walk into the room. Their names are Jean and Jean, and they started the Keepers. They are convinced that they're on the wrong timeline. And while these 2 people look harmless, they're not. I mean, not only are they really, really good card players, but they're also dangerous. During the presentation, they start showing items that prove that they aren't crazy and they might be on the wrong timeline. Some of these items they acquired in a shady parking lot deal with a guy that they eventually killed to get their money back. But the items are like action figures of the Umbrella Academy, videotapes that had Allison Hargraves as a star instead of the person that their current timeline says starred in the movie. It's really just more proof that everybody in the room didn't just mistakenly think that this stuff happened. No, it actually did happen. And they're calling it the umbrella effect. And the person they feel like is responsible for the umbrella effect is, of course, the ruling class, Reginald Hargrave. Female Jean says that all of these items are proof that they are living in the wrong timeline. And all these items are the key to something called the cleanse. Number 5 turns to Lila and says, well, what exactly is the cleanse? But Lila has no idea. The fact that the two are talking, though, gets the attention of female Jean, and she says, hey, can you guys in the back stand up? I can't really see you. And she does immediately recognize Nancy, but she doesn't recognize number 5. 5 introduces himself as Jerome, and he does ask, can you tell us more about the cleanse? Male Jean starts to say, some believe that it's the end, but he's stopped by female Jean. When he continues, he tells number 5 that others believe the cleanse is a great restoration. And when number 5 asks, what do you believe? Female Jean says, you're in luck. We're actually preparing a very special lecture on that topic. And if they're interested, they're willing to send them an invitation. They just need their address, phone number, contact information, all that. After the meeting, both Lila and number 5 go and grab coffee, but in reality, they just want to talk about what exactly just happened. Lila says, if these artifacts are from different timelines and now they're just showing up, and number 5 nods and says, it's possible the old man's reset didn't take. He has no idea what that means, but whatever it is, he tells Lila, don't say anything to the family just yet. As the two are discussing this, outside, Diego's actually watching it. He doesn't know that number 5 is the guy that Lila's talking to. He just has so many marital problems that he's convinced Lila wasn't at book club. And now he thinks Lila wasn't at book club because she was having a date with this mustachioed gentleman in a Jeff cap. Everybody, however, gets a phone call late that night from Luther. Luther's been living in a condemned building that's an old Hargraves home for wayward boys. When he and Ben got there, Ben noticed a letter, and initially Luther just figured it was from the city, but no, it's a letter saying that your brother Victor has been kidnapped. Follow my exact instructions and no harm will come to him. When all of them see this letter, they start making guesses on who could have kidnapped Victor, and initially the finger points to Reginald, but as Klaus points out, Dad doesn't give a crap about us. While they don't have any idea of who kidnapped Victor, and even though they don't have any powers, they all eventually agreed to head to the location and find out what they can and hopefully save their brother. And the location is at a dry cleaner's. They all enter very cautiously, and they do find Victor tied up. They're pretty relieved that he's okay. And then the kidnapper comes out of the shadows, holding a gun but shaking it. He's clearly nervous. He explains that he's never kidnapped anyone, but he didn't have any choice. He couldn't leave anything to chance, especially when it came to the Umbrella Academy. And that takes them all kind of off guard because no one's called them that in 6 years. 5 says, sorry dude, the Umbrella Academy doesn't exist. The kidnapper, whose real name is Cy Grossman, shows them a newspaper clipping about the Umbrella Academy saving the Eiffel Tower. They have no recollection of ever saving the Eiffel Tower, but Cy explains that he got it from a box that was found in the trunk of his daughter Jennifer's car. About a year ago, Jennifer met new friends. They started going to strange meetings with people that call themselves the Keepers. Over time, she just stopped talking to Cy completely. That was about 3 months ago. He hasn't seen her since. And they used to be very close, so it's not like a situation if she's got daddy issues. He's concerned. The cops don't take it seriously, so he felt like maybe the Umbrella Academy could help. It took him a while to track all of them down, and he does apologize for doing what he did to Victor, but he just wants to find his daughter. And as most of them start to explain to him that they just aren't the people in the picture, number 5 grabs the box and says, give us 24 hours, we'll find your daughter, which comes as a real big surprise to everybody else. But there's a reason why number 5 did it. It's because as he was looking through the box of items from Jennifer's car, which a lot of it was items all about them, all about the Umbrella Academy, all about proving their existence, he saw a jar full of marigold, the stuff that can get their powers back. After leaving Cy's dry cleaner, they head to a hibachi, and they discuss the marigold. Number 5 has no idea why the daughter of some guy who owns a dry cleaner had a jar of it, but the big question is, what do they do with it? Does anybody want to take it? And even though some of them clearly do want to, they all pretend at the moment that they're happy with their lives and they have no interest in taking it. Ben, however, gets extremely frustrated listening to this. He pockets it, he leaves for a second, he comes back with sake shots. He hands them out and he says, hey, just for me, old time's sake, let's have one last drink. He even implores Klaus to do it, who's been 3 years sober, saying that sake doesn't count. And they all drink it, none of them realizing what might be in those shots. In episode 2, they all wake up the next morning and they feel pretty shitty. They feel like they're suffering from a hangover, but they all have their powers back. Everybody except Klaus. He feels fine. And when they meet up at Luther's place, they're trying to figure out exactly how this happened. Now, some of their powers are changed up a little bit. Like Lila, she can now shoot laser beams out of her eyeballs. So in a way, her powers are advanced. And then there's Ben. He now has tentacles as tails. But it's also Ben who tells them exactly what happened to him, how he spiked all of their sake bombs, how he knew that they needed their powers back, and how he gave them what they wanted. But initially, they're not happy about it. They feel like it was a violation by Ben to do what he did. But then they start trying to figure out why Klaus isn't sick, and he admits that he never drank the sake bomb. He didn't think it was worth it. And now that he knows exactly what was in it, he's happy he didn't. He's the only one who doesn't have powers at the moment. They kind of brush that Klaus news aside, though, and start bickering once again on why they didn't want their powers back. It all has to do with ending the world a couple times, but saving the world a couple times. There's arguments on both sides, but at the moment, there's really no seeing eye to eye. While Ben is trying to convince him that they actually do want their powers back, he gets violently ill. And while he somewhat sobers up, they decide that they do need to go back to the dry cleaners to get more information. But when they get there, Sai isn't there. There is, however, a map pointed to a place called New Gumson, Maine. They don't know exactly what's in New Gumson. It could be Sai, it could be his daughter Jennifer, it could be a trap, but they're willing to see what exactly is in New Gumson, so they all pile into Diego's crappy van and they head there. The problem is they're all feeling the effects of that marigold. They're all starting to get sick. Late at night, though, Diego, while still driving, reveals to number 5 that he knows Lila's up to some shady stuff. He followed her, he saw her in a diner with some random guy, and the thing is, he doesn't know that number 5 was the other guy. So number 5, not telling Diego exactly what actually happened in that coffee shop, just says, Diego, whatever you think it is, it's not. Lila's not throwing away what she has with you. The next morning, they get to the outskirts of New Gumson, and 5 looks through the phone book. There is no Jennifer or Sai, and they realize they're just going to have to go into town and look for them. Ben, however, gets so frustrated that he decides, you know what, screw this, I'm going back home. And he heads into town, but he looks for a bus station instead of Jennifer or Sai. He finds a bus station, but it's right outside of a diner, so he heads in, and he ends up insulting the locals there. The one guy actually is the sheriff, and the girl who runs the place, who's named Rosie, well, she doesn't take too kindly to Ben's attitude, so she kicks him out of the diner. The rest of them head into town, and they do split up. Diego, Lila, and 5 kind of walk around this Christmas village, while Victor, Allison, and Luther go and look at an antique store. Klaus, meanwhile, is going to sit back with the van. While over at the antique store, Allison and Victor have a little bit of an awkward conversation. Allison hasn't heard from Victor in 5 years, and she's wondering why, and Victor says, well, phones do work both ways. Look, you did what you did, and I get it. You got Claire and Ray. Even though, by the way, Allison has since lost Ray, but still, nonetheless. Victor tells her that he understands why she did what she did, but the fact is, they're never going to be friends. And that's okay. Not too far away, while they were having that conversation, Ben found his way back into the diner. Rosie, who was having lunch, saw Ben sitting out there all sad and lonely and felt bad for him, so she invited him in, and the two struck up a conversation. They start a little bit of a get-to-know-you, their backstories a little bit. She tells him that her parents died when she was young, and the guy that he insulted initially, the town sheriff, is like family. He's her uncle. He understands that because he didn't grow up with a normal family. While these two didn't start out on the best terms, they definitely have a connection. But on the outside, Ben's family is finding out that there's more to this town than meets the eye. It all really kicks off when Allison asks the woman who owns the antique store, "Do you know Jennifer Grossman?" And the woman says she doesn't know, but this little old lady who's in a wheelchair goes back inside, grabs a shotgun, and tries to take it to Allison, Luther, and Victor. They're only saved because Victor uses his powers to thwart the woman. And it's not like Diego and Lila and Five didn't have the same outcome. While they were looking around the Christmas village, they noticed that everybody was looking at them, and everybody was armed with guns. When they tried to flee, Number Five's powers transported him to a random subway stop with a bunch of symbols rather than letters. The train shows up shortly after with an automated message that most trains will have, but this one is backwards. Now, I did actually look into what was actually being said. I recorded it, I reversed it. It's really just normal train lingo. Stand clear of the closing doors, that sort of thing. It's nothing Easter eggish. But when Five takes that train, he gets off at the very next stop. He walks up the steps, and he finds that he's in New Gumson, but it's different because he's in a new timeline. As Allison, Luther, Victor, Lila, and Diego fight for their lives, it's not like Ben is having a good time either. When the fighting kicked off, Rosie's uncle, the town sheriff, tried to get her out of there, but Ben, having a suspicious feeling about this guy, didn't want to let her go. The guy tried to taser Ben, which caused Ben's tentacles to come out, revealing his powers. And even after all of that, Rosie decided to go with him instead of the guy that she's known her whole life, her uncle. And when she did go with Ben and they ran out the door, her uncle radioed to somebody on where they were headed. Thanks to their powers, Diego and Lila are able to take out all the guys with guns, and they start making a mad dash towards the van with Klaus. Ben and Rosie do the same thing, and what they find is Klaus is talking to a woman who claims to be Jennifer. But when Rosie hears that, she screams, "No, I'm Jennifer. I only put Rosie on my name tag so guys don't stalk me." And Klaus, who's just being naive at this point, looks at the woman and says, "Okay, so if she's Jennifer, then who exactly are you?" But the woman never answers that question. She just looks at Klaus and says, "You never should have come," and then pulls out a gun and shoots him. And since Klaus doesn't have any powers, this gunshot could be fatal. She tries to take Jennifer at gunpoint, but Ben uses his powers to kill her. Now the big concern is saving Klaus's life, but also picking up Luther, Allison, and Victor. And they're also trying to make their way out of town, but Luther notices something interesting about a few of the dead guys that Lila and Diego took out. They're wearing Hargraves Enterprises tactical gear, meaning that Reginald had basically stuck Jennifer in this town and Truman showed her. Luther doesn't have a lot of time to dwell on this because they, just like Diego and Lila, have people chasing after them. That's when Allison realizes that her powers are tweaked a little bit as well. She no longer has to say, "I heard a rumor." She literally just looks at a guy, thinking about what she wants him to do, and he does it. He turns the gun on everybody he's with, and then he kills himself. Five reappears, and Diego picks them up a short time later. When they all pile into the van, everybody is tending to Klaus, who's clinging to life. And there's really only one option to save his life, and that's to give him Marigold. Now, there is an argument going back and forth on whether or not that's the right thing to do because Klaus was so against it, but Allison makes a decision that she has to do it to save his life, and she plugs the hole with this stuff. It works. Klaus comes back to life, and he seems to be fine. When everybody kind of calms down in the car, Ben turns to Jennifer and says, "We're going to get you back to your dad." But Jennifer looks at him and says, "My dad? Who are you talking about?" And he tells her, "Cy Grossman?" But she's never heard of Cy Grossman. And that's when their van is T-boned by Gene and Gene. When the car is hit, Ben and Jennifer's hands touch, and there's a fiery aura around them. But everybody in the car is pretty dazed. And that's when Gene and Gene get out, open the van door, they take Jennifer, and then before she leaves, female Gene looks inside and sees Lila and shakes her head and just says, "Nancy, Nancy, Nancy." In episode 3, the group is reeling and trying to gather their bearings, but Diego eventually asks Lila, "Why did that woman call you Nancy?" And at this point, number 5 isn't going to lie, so he tells the group all about Gene and Gene, the keepers, their beliefs. But when Ben asks, what do they want with Jennifer? Neither Lila or number 5 have that answer yet. Allison, meanwhile, goes to check on how Klaus is doing, but Klaus is pissed. He thinks that Allison completely crossed the line when she gave him Marigold, which he didn't want, and she ruined his 3 years of sobriety. He says some really nasty things to her. She says some nasty things to him, but eventually he just storms off. Once Klaus leaves, Allison looks at everybody and says, "You know what? Does anybody else have anything they want to get off their chest? No? No takers? Good, because I'm done being the bad guy with this family." It's kind of funny because Klaus headed straight to Allison's place, which is where he lived, but he went straight into junkie mode. He started ripping things off the walls. He stole Claire's piggy bank, and he was caught by Claire. And he immediately starts to lie about what he was doing, but Claire's concerned for her uncle in the moment. She tries to get Klaus to stay and talk to her, but he eventually just screams in her face. Claire is scared, Klaus is ashamed, but he eventually runs out of her place with TV in hand. He must have pawned it because eventually he ends up in an alleyway just floating, looking for his old dealer, which he does end up running into. The guy's name is Quinn. He's very surprised to see Klaus. And not just because Klaus is literally floating, it's because Klaus owes him $40,000. But Klaus knew he owed this guy money. He came here for a specific reason. He proceeds to insult Quinn until eventually Quinn pulls out a gun and shoots him. Klaus, though, is invincible, and he pretty quickly wakes up, which shocks the hell out of Quinn. Quinn decides he can use this little parlor trick to his advantage, so he takes Klaus prisoner, and he figures out a way where Klaus is going to pay off that $40,000 debt. After Klaus left the group, they just carried on. They had to fix the van, so they took it to a garage, but they discussed their next point of attack. All Ben cared about was Jennifer. He does have another issue that he's keeping from the group, though. He's got this really, really bad rash. He decides, however, that the group's plan sucks, and he's going to go on his own to find Jennifer. And that plan that Ben thinks sucks is to split up, with half the group going to follow the keepers. That would be number 5, Lila, and Diego, while the rest of the group, Luther, Victor, and Allison, they go to talk to Reginald, because the fact that that whole town was set up by Reginald Hargraves means that he has some answers to their questions. Ben just starts aimlessly walking down the street, trying to find any sign of life, town, anybody. But that rash is starting to glow. And what's interesting is Jennifer has an identical one on her arm. Now, she was taken to a farm by Gene and Jean, but she's terrified. She's basically held prisoner, even though they're telling her that she's not a prisoner. They start to tell Jennifer how they've been looking for her for a very long time, and they have a lot of questions about the cleanse, but she doesn't know what they're talking about. She starts to try and leave, but she suddenly gets a sharp pain in her head and a flashback to Ben's face, but also their hands touching in that fire aura. Both Gene and Jean realize that this girl has been through a lot, so they want to jog her memory. They bring her into a barn with a bunch of artifacts from other timelines proving the Umbrella Academy. But still, Jennifer's just scared and confused. That's when Gene and Jean pull out the big guns. Figuratively. They show Jennifer a giant squid. Because way back on January 23rd of 1995, fishermen caught a giant squid, and Jennifer was stuck inside. When she popped out, the only thing she said was, "the cleanse," and then she passed out. It's worth noting that one of the spectators to all of this was Reginald Hargraves. And it seems like when Gene and Jean showed Jennifer the giant squid, it does bring back some kind of memory because she just drops to her knees. Gene and Jean, though, fed up with how rude Jennifer has been, decide to lock her in that barn. Meanwhile, Ben does find somebody. He finds Cy. Cy can tell just by Ben's reaction that he did encounter Jennifer. And he gets Ben to admit that he can't stop thinking about Jennifer. And Cy says, well, now you understand how special she is. Ben tells Cy that Jennifer was taken by two weirdos named Gene and Jean. And upon hearing this, Cy says, you need to listen to me very carefully. She's in grave danger. Ben then gets the same sharp pain in his head that Jennifer had. And Ben asks, what is happening to me? And Cy tells him, it's her. She's calling out to you. I told you, she's special. And you're special, Ben, so listen to your body. You have everything you need to find her within you. So Ben does that. He listens to his body, and it does lead him to the farm where Jean and Jean are holding Jennifer. Ben arrives later that night, and he kills a whole lot of people, but he is able to get Jennifer back. While Ben was busy with Jennifer, Diego, Lila, and Five headed to Keeper's HQ, an address that's linked to Jean and Jean. While heading over there, Diego ended up confronting Lila about this mystery guy that she was meeting with, and Lila cracks up laughing, saying, "Diego, that was Five. We've been working undercover trying to infiltrate the Keepers." To finding out this information, Diego says this is worse than her having an affair. The fact that she was working undercover and she didn't ask for his help. Yeah, there's giant marital problems there. And when they eventually do arrive at Keeper's HQ, the trio kind of split up, with Lila and Five doing their own thing and Diego looking for any evidence he can find on what the group was up to, Jennifer, that whole bit. Lila forces number 5 to blink, and they head right back to that train station, the weird one. He tells her that he didn't want to go there, but ever since Ben gave him that marigold, every time he does blink, this is where he shows up. He tells her all about the different timeline by taking the train, but she wants to see it firsthand, so they take a train. And when they show up at the next timeline, they're at Jean and Jean's apartment, but it's the apocalypse, the one that 5 started, and the one that 5 stayed in for 40-something years. In fact, they start getting shot at by young number 5, so they have to get back in the train station. When they blink back to the Keeper's headquarters, Diego has found something. In the trash, he found a file that said the Umbrella Academy had 2 casualties, and it was the day that Ben died. Jennifer is mentioned in this file. Diego starts to break it down for them, that a random dry cleaner shows up out of the blue and hires them to go to New Gumson, Maine to rescue a girl named Jennifer. The whole town is nuts. They end up getting T-boned, and the girl gets kidnapped by 2 vigilantes in a station wagon. Now, in their trash, they find a foreign document that has something to do with the death of Ben. So Diego's now convinced that whatever's going on with Jennifer has something to do with Ben. Now they just have to track down Luther, Victor, and Allison and show them what they've found. And Luther, Victor, and Allison headed to Reginald's house. They were able to get in, but they didn't initially talk to Reginald. Instead, they talked to his new wife, Abigail Hargraves, and she's nothing like Reginald. In fact, she's really warm and welcoming. She takes the edge off of the trio a little bit, who came in ready to fight with Reginald about anything. She even does a little get-to-know-you with the group until Reginald shows up, and he's pissed off because he got word about what happened in New Gumson, Maine. He's quite pissed off at what they did, but it's Abigail who actually calms him down and tells him he's being rude. They fill Reginald in on everything, why they went to New Gumson, getting hired by Cy, all of that. And he tells them that he built that entire town to protect Jennifer. Protect her from the Umbrella Academy. Allison laughs and says, "Okay, so she is like us." But Reginald shakes his head and says, "No, she's nothing like you. In fact, she's the complete opposite in every way imaginable. And she has more power than all of you put together." That's when Diego, Lila, and Five walk through the door and show the group the file about what went down the day that Ben died. Five tells the group that the file is called the Jennifer Incident, and it explains how Ben died. And Luther says, "We already know how Ben died." He starts reciting exactly what he thinks happened, but the thing is, everybody starts reciting the exact same thing. Because this generic memory of how Ben died was put in them by Reginald Hargraves. Nobody actually knows how Ben died. None of them can actually explain what went down that day. Initially, Reginald has no interest in putting the memory back in their heads, but it's Abigail who convinces him to do so. So he takes the group to a separate room. He straps all of them up, everybody except number 5, who doesn't want Reginald anywhere near his head, and Lila. She's not interested either. Right before the group has this experiment done on them, Lila drops a bomb on Diego. She thinks that they should probably take some time away from each other. He doesn't really have a lot of time to process this because Reginald flips the switch and they start getting that memory back. In episode 4, you find out what happened the night Ben died. The kids went on a mission and they were told very specific instructions by Reginald, which Luther planned on following. But Ben, who didn't want to go on the mission, didn't give a rat's ass what Reginald said. So when he heard someone talking from a container, curiosity got the best of him. He opened it up, and he saw a girl there, and it was Jennifer. And even though Luther warned him, hey, this isn't what Dad told us to do, Ben wasn't about to listen, so he let Jennifer out. And that's when he and Jennifer were shot by Reginald Hargraves. When Allison, Luther, and Victor find out the truth, they lose it on Reginald, but he reminds them, I'm another timeline's Reginald. The Reginald you're actually mad with is not me. But that doesn't mean Reginald disagrees with the decision of the other timeline's Reginald. He actually defends it, saying if these two kids were left to their own devices, they would have destroyed the world. But as the kids get more and more mad at the Reginald in front of them, Abigail steps up and says, it's not his fault, it's mine. She explains that she created Marigold, but unbeknownst to her, at the exact same time, another element was formed. It's called Durango. When Marigold and Durango interact, it causes a reaction. A physical, unstoppable reaction. The extinction of everything they know, aka the cleanse. By the time she realized this, it was too late for her own world. Now, why this is important is because Durango is inside Jennifer. And if they come in contact with Jennifer, stop me if you've heard this one before, they're going to end the world. That's kind of an issue considering Luther let Ben go to find Jennifer, which Ben has done. He and Jennifer acknowledge they do have some kind of connection. But as Luther explains to the group what he saw on Ben, aka the rash, Reginald gets sick of listening to it, so he grabs a rifle because he's planning on hunting either Ben or Jennifer and killing one of them. Everybody pushes Reginald back on this idea, including Abigail, but Reginald only sees one path to victory on this, and it gets to the point where Allison throws something at his head and says, I don't think you're listening clearly, you're not in charge anymore. But that pales in comparison to what Victor does. She unleashes all that pent-up frustration right onto him, flat out telling him that he won't be killing anybody, but also, well, he's got some daddy issues. He only stops when Abigail comes over and gently touches his shoulder. This does work, though. Reginald realizes he's going to have to come up with some other plan. But then he gets word on what Ben did at the farm, and they all head over there. As they're admiring Ben's handiwork, they do learn who the farm belongs to, which gives them a lead. Lila decides to pull number 5 aside and asks, why don't we just use that train of yours and go back in time, stop the coming Armageddon? We'll just travel back to the original Jennifer incident and stop your Ben from ever touching that Jen. 5 gives a bunch of excuses on why this would never work, but Lila brings up a good point. It's worth a try. So 5 gives in. Before they leave for this train station, Diego does pull Lila aside and has to have a conversation with her about what she said before Reginald flipped a switch. There's a lot of marriage drama. She tells him where she's coming from on this, and then she leaves him standing there bewildered. While Lila was giving the tough news to Diego, number 5's boss from the CIA comes and gets an update on what exactly is going on. He's not happy. 5 tells him that he does have a few leads on what happened at this farm, but he needs a favor. He points to both Diego and Luther. He explains that they're his brothers, and they're kind of getting in his way. So he asks his boss to take him back to headquarters and basically babysit him, which, reluctantly, the boss does agree to. When Diego and Luther arrive at the CIA, well, at least Diego thinks that this could be a job interview. They have no idea what the actual intention of this tour is. This frees up number 5 and Lila to go time traveling a bit. Number 5's plan is to go one stop on the train, go to the apocalypse timeline, and then warp back to 2006. When they get down to the train station, though, Lila notices that there's a map just sitting on the bench, so she decides to grab it, and they take the train. They get up to the apocalypse timeline, they warp back to 2006, but there's one slight issue. They don't encounter the Umbrella Academy or the Sparrow Academy. They encounter the Phoenix Academy. Although the Phoenix Academy does have members of both the Umbrella and Sparrow Academy. Nonetheless, it is the wrong academy. They're in the wrong timeline, and number 5 and Lila have to get the hell out of there before they're killed. Lila starts trying to figure out exactly how to get to where they need to go by reading the map, but she can't. And 5 isn't about to wait for her, so he just hops on the next train. But it wasn't the train they needed. And number 5 and Lila are on an express train. Where they're headed, they have no idea. While those two were train hopping, Victor pulled Reginald aside and told him, I can save Ben. When he gets him alone, he explains how he can take out Ben's marigold, which Reginald doesn't think is possible. But Victor says, I've done it before. This spurs on a conversation of why Victor would even want to do it, and he explains how Ben is his brother, which Reginald doesn't understand. Reginald thinking this is a meaningless connection, Victor explaining how siblings are a pain in your ass, but when you need them, they'll always be there for you. The conversation ends with Victor telling Reginald off for being an asshole and leaving. As for Allison, she had to head home. She found out exactly what Klaus did and mainly what he did to Claire. She was concerned. What Claire can't understand is why Allison keeps giving second, third, fourth chances to Klaus, why she allows this kind of behavior. And as Allison defends it, Claire just stops her and says, Uncle Klaus is invincible. So why do you keep trying to save somebody who can literally save themselves? This likely means that Allison is no longer searching for Klaus, and it would be tough to find him anyway. Quinn has him locked up, and the way he's utilizing Klaus's skills is he's having Klaus be a medium, but a sex medium. If your husband or wife passed away, you come to Klaus, the deceased takes over his body, and you can once again have sex with your deceased spouse. He does, however, make a connection with one woman who, after having sex with her deceased husband, comes back not looking for sex, she's looking for money. Klaus is able to find out where the husband hid the money, and he tells the wife whatever she needs to hear in order to get a brooch, which allows Klaus to escape the basement that Quinn was hiding him in, and he heads to a graveyard to dig the money up, but he's caught by the wife. They're also caught by Quinn, and a shootout takes place. Most people die, except Quinn. He takes the money from Klaus, tells him that this will take care of the debt, but then he throws Klaus in the casket and closes it. And Klaus just thinks this is a joke at first until he can't get out. And then he starts hearing Quinn pour dirt on the grave. At this point, finding Jennifer is pretty low on Klaus's list, but it's the number one priority for Gene and Jean. Using their umbrella effect connections, they take over a King Reg. It's a Burger King, folks. They start using this place as their headquarters, putting out the word to their network to keep an eye out for both Ben or Jennifer or both. And then they get an interesting visitor. They've never met this guy before. It's Cy, although he introduces himself to Gene and Jean as Denny Muntz, and he has the umbrella effect tattoo that proves he's in the network. He claims to be from the Red Deer chapter, which male Gene says never heard of it, but Cy assures him that the chapter is small, but they're all true believers. Male Gene says, all right, well, what's your business here? And Cy/Denny says, I came to talk about the missing girl. And that's the question on everybody's mind. Where are Ben and Jennifer? Well, they're holed up at a place called the Overpass Inn. And they had their first little bit of a lover's quarrel, but as they sit in separate rooms, they're talking through the walls, and there is a real connection there that neither of them can deny. Hell, they're even watching the same movie at the same time. They love it for the same reasons. It gets to the point where that night, the sexual tension is too much. Jennifer comes into Ben's room. They start hooking up. But what they're unaware of is that is having a completely negative effect on the outside. As they bang each other's brains out, energy waves are radiating out of the room and destroying anything in its path, including the poor front desk guy is probably making $10 an hour. In episode 5, the problem with Victor storming off is that Reginald was his ride, so they have to ride back together, and they converse more about this whole idea that Victor can save Ben. While on this trip, Victor is able to convince this version's Reginald to give the idea a shot, but they also get news on what happened at the Overpass Inn. Reginald's men got word on seismic activity to the point of like earthquake level stuff. When they went to go check it out, they saw the destruction that Ben and Jennifer had left in their wake. Reginald turns to Victor and says, Ben's body at this point is a vessel. The cleanse will slowly take hold. And at that moment, Ben and Jennifer are headed down to Florida. Ben had stashed some money away from his crypto scheme in the Cayman Islands, and he knows that if he gets to Florida, he and Jennifer can run away together. But one of Reginald's spies notices them, and he tips off Reginald. And Reginald tells Victor, and Victor calls up Ben on a payphone. Yes, the only payphone left in the year 2024. Ben Hargraves just happens to be in the area of. and he's very surprised to hear Victor. And Victor starts to explain the fact that, huh? And Victor starts to explain what happened to him, the cleanse, how he's not right at the moment. But Ben isn't hearing any of it because in his mind, he feels great. He just completely dismisses all of Victor's overtures to kind of turn himself in and stop this madness, and he hangs up and takes off. He leaves Victor realizing that this is going to be a lot harder than he thought it would be. While Reginald's men were able to get eyes on Ben and Jennifer, Gene and Gene's men have had no luck. They also have their first bit of a tiff when they disagree on Cy. Male Gene can't stand him, female Gene wants to hear him out. Female Gene wins this argument, and they decide to hear Cy out. And Cy tells him that he also has people, and he knows that they lost the girl. They go on to explain exactly how Jennifer escaped their custody, and when they finish the story, Cy says, "Great, because that boy that she escaped with is the missing piece of this puzzle. But that boy has a family, and if they find Ben and Jennifer before we do, everything is ruined. So why don't you let me find where the family's going and stop them?" But male Gene doesn't take all that well to this kind of talk. Meanwhile, the family is split up. Guilt got the best of both Allison and Claire, and they decided to go track down good old Uncle Klaus. Luckily for Klaus, Claire had been dragged to that alley before in a cab with Klaus, so at least she had something to go on, and it ended up being a good tip because it's Quinn's place. When Allison enters this crack den, she does find Klaus's room, but she's attacked by Quinn, who hits her in the head, and it turns her powers off for a little bit. Allison definitely would have been taken in by Quinn, but Claire comes to her aid. Claire is able to distract Quinn just in enough time for Allison's powers to come back. She proceeds to use those newfound powers to get the truth out of Quinn on where he buried Klaus, while also turning Quinn into a eunuch. Both Allison and Claire rush to the gravesite, they find it, they dig Klaus up, and they give him a big, giant hug. Everybody's relieved to see one another. As for Diego and Luther, they got dumped off on the basement floor of the CIA by Five's boss, who didn't feel like babysitting them. While Luther was able to figure out pretty quickly that Sector R, the place where they were put, was a big nothing burger, Diego was convinced that it was a place for top-level units, elite stuff. Luther compared it to being put on the Sunday morning shift, legs and eggs, but there was no convincing Diego of this. So they decided to go their separate ways, with Diego waiting for something to happen in the room, and Luther sneaking off to see if maybe Number 5's boss had anything on the keepers. When Luther left, though, Diego got some really good perspective from one of the workers in Sector R. Diego noticed that this guy had a family portrait, but the CIA agent tells him that he's on his third divorce because the job has just taken so much out of him, and none of it's been worth it. He would give up everything to just be able to play catch with his boys, help them with homework. Suddenly, Diego realizes that his dream job isn't really a dream at all. For some, it's a complete nightmare. It finally dawns on him that Lila and his family are really the important thing. So he hops on the phone to call back home and talk to Lila, but Lila's mother tells Diego that she's not there. So where is she? Well, she and Five have been traveling the subway system for 7 years trying to get back home. And it got to the point where Five says, we got to go somewhere else. We got to go to just some place, lay low for a while. We're not giving up, but just a place where we can actually eat food, get a hot shower, that kind of thing. And they did that. They stayed for a while, and they fell in love. Wasn't like Number 5 meant for this to happen, but it just kind of did. All of a sudden, he became Mr. Steal Your Girl, and he was smitten with Lila. But one day, when he headed back to the subway station to find more scrap metal, he noticed that there was a book under the train platform, and it was in his handwriting, and it gave him the directions on how to get back home. But even then, he kept it for 6 months before he showed Lila, and he was shocked at Lila's reaction. She immediately wanted to go back home. All of a sudden, she forgot about the relationship she had with Five. Her whole thing was getting back home, and it caused a fight between the two. Number 5 feeling like they had everything they needed at this one house, and Lila having to remind him that what they had wasn't real. Oh, and also, she's got kids she has to get back to. Number 5 pleaded with her that her relationship was a sham, and then also they didn't know what world they were going back to. But Lila took offense to all of that, and she was dead set on heading back home and being with her family. Her husband, though, was still at the CIA and still waiting for something to happen when Luther rushes in, because Luther's snooping ended up paying off. He went to Number 5's boss's office, and while he didn't find anything on the keepers, it turned out Number 5's boss was a believer. He had the umbrella effect tattoo, and he tried to take out Luther. He stuffed an elevator full of about 7, 8 agents, thinking that that would be enough, but no, as soon as they attacked Luther, they messed around and found out. This, however, caused a bunch of CIA agents to flood Sector R and try to take out both Diego and Luther, and they were unsuccessful. Luther and Diego did great working as a team. They were able to take all of them out, and as they were fleeing, Number 5's boss said, "It doesn't matter. Nothing will stop the cleanse." Diego and Luther weren't the only ones that were attacked, though, by umbrella effect assassins. So were Victor and Reginald. There was a trap set up on the road, and when they hit it, they were completely ambushed. Victor is able to use his powers to get out of it, but as they flee the scene, Reginald does tell Victor, "I can't speak to what the other Hargraves did to you, but it was wrong of him to treat you the way he did. It is now abundantly clear to this version of myself that you deserve to wear the uniform just as much, if not more, than the others." For Victor, he's been waiting his whole life to hear that. But still, they're looking for Ben and Jennifer. And their little trip to Florida does get derailed because Jennifer is feeling the effects of the cleanse. That rash that's on her arm, it's gone to her face, and she's not feeling so hot. She tells Ben, "You gotta pull over." And they run into an empty department store. Jennifer tells Ben that she is terrified. But what they don't know is they were seen by Jean and Jean's spies. And over at the King Reg, one of the workers walks up to Jean and excitedly tells them, "We have eyes on Ben and Jen." Male Jean tells female Jean, "It's time to put out the call." And female Jean does agree, but male Jean's been acting weird. And that's because male Jean isn't actually male Jean. You see, male Jean hated Cy, and he tried to kick him out of the King Reg and tell him to get lost. In turn, Cy killed male Jean, stabbing him. And with one of his last dying movements, Jean tried to scratch up Cy's face, but realized that it was a mask, because Cy was actually Abigail the entire time. And once she killed Jean, she just took over his body. And in the series finale, the keepers put out the call and they get an absolute mob to surround the department store. But they aren't the only ones who are interested in both Jen and Ben. A short time after both Jeans are rallying the troops, Reginald and his men show up, along with Victor. Victor still has hopes of getting in and trying to save all of this. He's still very convinced that even though there's a small percentage of success, he can save Ben. And while Reginald doesn't believe that he actually has a shot in hell of doing this, Reginald is willing to give him the time to at least try. In order to do that, though, they're going to have to get through Jean and Jean's mob. So they decide to talk to Jean and see if there's any reasoning with these two, but there isn't. In fact, male Jean, who we know at this point is Abigail, seems to take little petty shots at Reginald that seem way, way, way too personal. Reginald and Victor realize that in order to get to Ben, they're going to have to be creative. When Jean and Jean left the conversation, female Jean starts ripping into male Jean because of the way he's been acting. She didn't like the way he handled that conversation, and she hasn't liked the way he's handled himself recently. And this argument gets more and more personal. And not only that, but it's in front of their supporters, which male Jean doesn't take too kindly to. But female Jean thinks she's dealing with male Jean. She doesn't realize she's dealing with Abigail, and Abigail ain't having any of it. Abigail gets real sick of listening to female Jean to the point where she takes a katana and she kills her, to the shock of all of the keepers. They're stunned because female Jean was the leader of the keepers. It was her idea, after all. Male Jean was kind of looked at as a lackey. But Abigail is really quick-witted. She's able to convince everybody that female Jean was straying in the beliefs of the cleanse and to keep the mission in mind. So the mob is still very much behind male Jean / Abigail, and they're not willing to let anybody in the department store until the cleanse is complete. While Victor and Reginald try to figure out a way into the department store, not too far away, Lila and Five return back home to Lila's house, and she's really nervous. She hasn't seen her kids or Diego in 7 years, even though to them, it'll only be a few minutes, maybe an hour tops. Her anxiety, though, is put to ease when the door opens up and it's Diego, who's thrilled to see Lila, because his entire mood about Lila and the family has completely shifted. It takes her a little bit off guard. And shortly after Five and Lila show up, Claire, Allison, and Klaus arrive as well. So all the Umbrella Academy are under one roof except Victor, who's dealing with the whole Ben situation. Luther does wonder where exactly Victor is, but nobody has any idea. And that's when he excitedly brags about his find at the CIA, that he was able to figure out Five's boss was a keeper the entire time, which is something that Five didn't even know after working at the CIA for years. Five, though, is a little bit distracted with his whole Lila situation. He still isn't over her. And it doesn't help with the fact that Lila is over in the corner and Diego is all over her. Five is very much on edge. He starts to get into it with Diego, and Lila steps in to break it up. And that's when Diego notices that Lila's wearing a bracelet, and she hates bracelets. He asks her where she got it, and it becomes clear that it was given to her by Five. That's really, really strange, and Diego asks, "Wait, is there something going on between you two?" And they admit that, yeah, there is, which comes as a complete shock to everybody in the family. They didn't see this coming. Diego is completely shocked, bewildered, betrayed, all of that. But Lila has to sit him down and make him understand that they were busy for 7 years trying to get back home. They were the only company the other person had. She never stopped trying to find a way home, and when she finally got a way home, she ran back to it. By all accounts, Diego is taking this extremely well, but he does ask Lila, "Do you love him?" And Lila doesn't know how to answer that. She does get bailed out when the news pops in on the TV and mentions how Ben is the one in the department store. So now the Umbrella Academy has a lead on where Ben is. They all jump in the van and they head there. They have no idea that a mob is waiting for them. And when they arrive, that mob shoots them up. All of them are crouched down, hiding behind this van as it takes heavy, heavy gunfire. And Lila has to turn to number 5 and say, "You need to blink us out of here." Now, 5 doesn't think he can do it, because every time he has blinked, he's just gone to that subway station. But just like before, Lila encourages him to just try, and he's able to blink everybody into the department store. And that's where they see Victor knocked out. Because Victor was able to get in the department store, and she did find Ben, and Ben is looking rough. I mean, he looks like a complete monster. And he told Victor to just go away. But Victor wasn't willing to do that. Victor, still thinking that he could save Ben, made an attempt, but when the phone rang, it startled Ben, his tentacles snapped, hitting Victor in the face and knocking him out. So when 5 blinks the Umbrella Academy into the building, all they see is just Victor lying there. But then they see Ben and Jennifer crawl from the shadows, and they see what's become of them. They both are complete monsters. At this point, Ben admits he can't control it. But Victor, who has come to at this point, still wants to try to get that Durango or Marigold out of him. Ben isn't sure it's going to work, but Victor tries, grabbing Ben's arm, and it seems like Victor is extracting something. What Victor doesn't know, though, is Reginald's time is up. He tried to get a hold of Victor, unsuccessfully, to get an update, and his sniper has Ben in his sights, and Reginald gives him the okay to take the shot. At the very last second, though, Ben, realizing that a bullet is headed for Victor, pushes Victor out of the way and takes the bullet, sacrificing himself. While you might think this would end the cleanse, it doesn't. Jennifer just consumes Ben's body and starts to get bigger and bigger. The Umbrella Academy does everything in their power to stop Jennifer, but it doesn't work. No one's powers are enough. It also doesn't help that 5 and Diego start fighting amongst themselves as this is happening, and it gets to the point where Lila has to step in and say, "Can you guys chill for a second before the world literally ends?" 5, though, who is in a very emotional state, snaps at Diego, And Lila has to look at him and say, Five, it's over between us, which pisses off Five so much, he blinks out of there. He decides he's just going to go back to the subway station, ride the train, and have a think. And he does that. He reminisces about their relationship, about the 7 years, but then he sees something really, really interesting. It's himself. He decides to get off the train and follow this number 5, and what he finds is at a particular train station, there's a delicatessen. And when he goes inside, it's a bunch of number 5s. One of them gets his attention, and he starts to explain that this is basically where all the other timelines number 5s have shown up when they've given up on trying to save the world. Because all these other timelines branched off thanks to the Umbrella Academy. And while number 5 did set up the commission to just get that one timeline back and everything back in sync, nothing has worked, ever. Every time they try, the world ends, they have to put it back together, it's a mess. So when you give up, you just show up at a deli, accepting the fact that you'll never be able to fix it. But number 5 isn't willing to accept that. He knows how to fix it, and it's going to be very, very difficult. Now, while 5 was getting this revelation, his brothers and sister were realizing that there were no match for Jennifer and the cleanse. They had to flee. They weren't the only ones, though. Everybody at this point was fleeing because this monster was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Reginald Hargraves had accepted defeat. He went to sit on a bench, and that's when he was joined by Jean. Shortly after Jean sits down, though, Jean reveals himself as Abigail, which comes as a complete shock to Reginald. And Abigail tells him that she did this because it had to be done. She explains that dying was her penance for creating something so deadly, and then Reginald brought her back to life, which she never asked for. That action, bringing her back to life, had consequences far greater than anything he could have imagined. And it was her duty to set it right. Reginald isn't mad at this. He actually admits that he was wrong, and Abigail made it right. And then the two get swallowed up by the cleanse. At this point, the Umbrella Academy had made it back to Luther's, where number 5 blinks in with his big plan. He tells the group, we have to die. That's the only way to set the timeline right. And this isn't really a big shocker, but no one's a huge fan of that idea. They say, 5, there's got to be another way, but 5 assures them, there is no other way. We have to die. If we don't, this will just repeat itself over and over and over again. We have to sacrifice ourselves. So they all kind of agree. They're going to make the ultimate sacrifice. Lila takes all of the family members, all the innocent people, all the people that don't have Marigold in them, to the train station, putting them on a train and making sure that they're going to get to safety. And then everybody gets in a circle and they wait for the cleanse to swallow them up. As this is happening, people apologize for past sins. Klaus jokes around a little bit. They all share a laugh. And then they are swallowed up by the cleanse, and the timelines are put back together. As far as we know, on August 8th, 2024, it was a perfectly normal day. Unless you watched the show and you were at this one part because all the secondary characters showed up. But hey, that is the end of the Umbrella Academy. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. Go buy like a t-shirt or a mug or something. That'd be cool. You know, I got bills to pay. Oh, and if I made a mistake, just let it go in the comment section. Like, mistakes happen, folks. You know, like ending the world. Sometimes you got to put it back together. I can't put it back together, though. What I can do is just apologize, like Reginald did. All right. Thanks again.